So when we first started analyzing our cardiac arrest calls, we literally had no data on it beforehand. It was paper PCRs, and we didn't utilize them well. It was essentially a stack of paper that we got no information from. I brought it over to a spreadsheet, and then I started whittling away, mining the data, looking for trends, looking for patterns of things that are working well, things that we're not doing well. Baseline looked like we had work to do. When I started it in 2015 for the first 6 months, I ran the first 6 months of cardiac arrest numbers for that year. And we were at a 23% ROSC rate.
It's not as good as we'd like it to be. We thought it should be better than that. So, is that tool really doing what we want it to do? And you're turning it off to check a pulse, and if you're turning it off to check a rhythm, and if you're turning it off to intubate, and you're turning it off to start an IV, and you're turning it off to give drugs, and you're doing all that, right? It does no good to have a device that you're turning off. Nothing trumps compressions, nothing. Airway doesn't trump compressions, not in our game. So you use the auto pulse correctly, it has significant survivability, significant ROSC, but we still weren't seeing the numbers that we'd like to see. And so we go back and say, well, what can we do differently? Kevin and Chief Grayson bring back the rescue pod.
We implemented the rescue pod in the final quarter of 2015, so in October of 2015. And for those last 3 months, our ROSC percentage went up to 40%. Myself, my boss, Joe Powell, and our chief, Sean Grayson, started looking outward to see what other agencies, departments are doing. We noticed that someone in Florida was doing heads-up CPR. It can only be performed if you have a mechanical CPR device. Great, we have a mechanical CPR device. We have gurneys that allow us to do heads-up CPR. Oh, and the best thing about that is it works best when you have a rescue pod, and we already had a rescue pod in place. If you applied all of our interventions, our cardiac survivability tools, we're at 60%. Every time you took one of the tools away, that percentage dropped a little bit. So you take one away, it dropped to 53%. You take two away, it dropped to about 45%. You take them all away, and we were still at 38%. So what that told us is there wasn't a single magic ingredient. It was a system in place that anytime we ran the system, it improved our numbers drastically. So we're not seeing the patient before 8 minutes. So 8 minutes no longer qualifies as early defibrillation. So rather than defibrillating a patient and putting them into asystole, and the same as we think for fine VFib, which is no difference than asystole, we decide to prime the pump. We do 5 minutes of CPR, high quality CPR, with the autopulse on continuous compressions, and then we make the decision afterwards, as long as the end-tidal CO2 tells us that the patient is ready to be defibrillated. End-tidal CO2, it's a wonderful device that we have, and we have the ability to use. We use it to measure everything and anything and everything we do in a cardiac arrest. It tells us exactly which way the patient is trending. Are they trending towards ROSC? Should we continue working this code? Or are they trending towards we need to terminate this resuscitation because the patient is no longer viable? After we started deploying our new cardiac survivability tools, was getting the hospitals to understand that what we were doing and why we're doing it. Because if our guys who we've educated on these different tools look at it and say it looks strange, these people who have never been educated on an auto pulse or a rescue pod or heads-up CPR, they look at us like we're crazy when we roll into a hospital with all of these different interventions in play. So we realize that the more successful we are in training our citizens, as well as the rest of our city employees, and getting AEDs in proper locations where they can be utilized, the more successful we're going to be as a department for obtaining ROSC.